And thank you for joining. Really excited to have you here and talk about your lessons you've learned over the last however many years in different high performance environments. I'm really excited to get this conversation. Let's do this again. I'll do introductions and then I'll ask you to introduce yourself again. And hopefully people join and ask some questions. And if they don't, I'll keep an eye on for the comments in the chat. And if they have any questions, I'll ask them over to you. But if I quickly introduce myself, if you don't know who I am, my name is Rich. I'm a high performance exec coach, helping leadership and teams and individuals perform at their best with lessons from sport, a performance framework I've built this year, and Wellbeing as the foundations to help people kind of perform at their best, create more energy, get more motivation, etc., etc. I'm also the founder of a company called Employees Health, which is a wellbeing education company, supporting organizations with their wellbeing strategy, helping them educate and support teams and leaders manage wellbeing and mental health in the workplace. If you want to know more, drop me a line. Now, Henry, over to you. Please tell me who you are and what you do.
Yeah, of course. Just like I said before, obviously we'll be touching on identity, but I'll give you my professional identity. So I'm CEO of Altara, which is a relatively new company. What we're doing is we're creating a new category, human optimization systems, basically taking the kind of performance and life support previously reserved for high net worth individuals, elite athletes, special forces operators, and democratizing that to people operating in high pressure environments that want to thrive both personally and professionally. And we do that through a combination of AI, neuroscience, coaching, and community. And then I also have another role, which is Chief Human Performance Officer, which sounds a little bit left field, but in essence, that is within Scallywag Venture Studio, which we also co-founded, so myself and 3 others earlier in the year. And the idea is to leverage AI to help basically start and scale companies that enable humans to thrive in this new period of change and this new era, you know, be it climate, economic instability, changing generational expectations. All of these things are combining at the moment to create what we call this BENI world: brittle, anxious, non-linear, and incomprehensible. And we want to equip people for the future with the ability to thrive in that.
Yeah, awesome. What are you seeing when you're speaking to people? What are you kind of mainly seeing helping people at the moment?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I think to get on to what actually helps, you probably have to understand the root cause first. So really the 3 main pain points that we're seeing, we've spoken to tons and tons of executives and people operating in high pressure environments, is this increase in noise, right? We all have a PhD in our pocket now. And with that increased knowledge, research actually shows we become worse at making decisions. And so now, and I always view it as knowledge, wisdom, and capability, people are feeling that the knowledge isn't helping. So there's this element of drowning in noise. The next is not having tools or solutions to thrive within that, to thrive within this era of uncertainty, both for themselves and for their people, whether it's their team or their company. And the last is people basically refusing to abide with the previous post-industrial rules, which is trading health for wealth or happiness. And I think a lot of people are waking up to the fact that that trade-off actually is a performance disadvantage in this new world. So from our standpoint, what we see as the solution is an entirely new approach, a new paradigm towards human thriving and high performance in high pressure environments. Nearly every solution out there works, but it doesn't necessarily work sustainably, and it doesn't necessarily allow the individual to achieve the life they want. And so what we're saying is basically the reductionist approaches out there, siloed approaches, whether it's exec coaching, whether it's well-being initiatives, you know, they can make a difference, but they never truly encapsulate the whole person. And so we are now looking at things on a systems thinking level and viewing high performer in whatever area it is as a whole human, understanding how they are across every area of life and helping them to understand what the greatest area to focus on will be right now for them to be able to achieve the life that they want, both personally and professionally.
As a high performance coach, exec coach, wellbeing coach, I think I understand this. I think it comes from awareness, but to be able to input that and to create the end result, that result, what does that need?
So we are now leveraging technology that we didn't have 5 years ago. So what we have is the ability to build systems that actually create a level of wisdom we don't currently hold. Systems that allow us to identify our biggest bottlenecks, our biggest biases, basically help us build out our own human operating system to understand what we need to thrive in the environments that we want to be in. Mm-hmm. So really, it's a combination, like I said, of AI, neuroscience, coaching, and community. And we think by leveraging all of these 4 things, we can create a system, which is Altara, that will allow people to do that, both quicker and with less pain and frustration. So it's kind of that we've arrived at the right time, and the solutions that are currently available aren't necessarily able to leverage the level that people need in regards to thriving in uncertainty. So that's how we're looking at it.
Brilliant. Thank you, Laura, for joining. Could you mute yourself? Yeah, wicked. It does sound really interesting, but that's for a different for a different day on a different for a different topic. What I really want to know and get kind of your for the guest or the listeners to know is your story, because you've got a pretty crazy story in regards to like who you've worked for, the environment you've worked in. So could you just give us a little more kind of information about how you've got to where you are?
Yeah, of course. And yeah, I'm more than happy to share it. And it's probably just going to be a list of mistakes and failures that have helped me get to where I am today, and I'll continue to make them, but hopefully can glean some light on what I learned as well. So my story starts like the majority of people that become coaches. I was a decent rugby player growing up. It was my first love, but I spent more time in A&E than I actually did on the pitch. So I quickly realised maybe it isn't the career for me, but I knew what I got from sport and from rugby specifically, I wanted to get more of. I wanted to be part of a team, feel that sense of purpose, that achievement, and help others to achieve the same kind of thing. So went to university, did my degrees, went and did a master's up in Edinburgh, and then landed my first gig with Harlequins Rugby. So I was working as a strength conditioning coach there. And I had an interesting year there, obviously, bottom of the food chain, made more protein shakes than I ever have in the rest of my life for the players, as is always the case. But it was my first real full-time exposure into high-performance environment. I'd been very fortunate to intern in several before, and I've worked with Olympic athletes down to university level, and I've done a week's work experience with Saracens, one of the most high-performing rugby teams in the Northern Hemisphere. So it was really my first full-time embeddment in that environment. And an opportunity arose with my boss to go out and support a team in New Zealand for 3 months. And so obviously when he asked me if I wanted my name to be put forward, I was 24. I'd moved back home because it was just down the road from work, and any opportunity to find my independence again after 4 years at uni was a good one. And obviously, you know, the mythical All Blacks growing up as a rugby fan was too hard to turn down as a culture to understand. So went over there, and I remember, I tell everyone, I landed, you know, so jet lagged and emotionally vulnerable. And I remember messaging my family on WhatsApp and saying, I think I've made a mistake, because I arrived and it was just a corrugated iron shack where I picked my bag up from the other side of the car park. And then I arrived at the place I was staying at. There was a goat tied up outside next door. And I was thinking, what have I done? What have I got myself in for here? Where have I come? Yet within 2 weeks, I felt a deeper sense of belonging to that team and community than any I'd ever been a part of. And that really kick-started that curiosity and lit that fire in me to understand, how on earth have they done that? Is that one of the mythical secrets behind the All Black success? And so I had 3 amazing years there. I was able to stay on, was fortunate to be offered a full-time role to come back and work with the players. And in essence, that was really the start of my journey, and spending time with all kinds of high performing teams and organizations, time with High Performance Sport New Zealand. The coach I was working with very closely went on to coach the All Blacks and other coaches that played for them, and we had players with them. So it was really in this melting pot of high performance. And interestingly, what I'd seen was, coming from a team where we literally had, you know, one of the biggest budgets to one which had a fraction of it, it made me really understand what truly underpins high performance. And what New Zealand does phenomenally well is people and environments. And so that was my first kind of experience into that. And yeah, it was an amazing experience. I was thrown into a leadership position at the age of 24, basically a year and a half after being an intern, leading a whole department. And God, I made a lot of mistakes. I like to think that it just meant I got them out of the way a bit earlier, and can hopefully help others avoid those too. But I had really supportive group around me, and I thrived in the end, personally and professionally. But it was extremely difficult. And in essence, after those 3 years, I felt like I'd learned and grown as much as I could in that environment. There wasn't an opportunity to work up anymore. I was at the top within that organization. So I wanted to test whether the same principles I'd seen work in this environment applied in others. So I came back to the UK. I was doing some consultancy work in sport, and then a role popped up to work with the military. And I thought, well, who better matches the values of the type of organization I'd love to be a part of? So I applied, was shortlisted, invited down, and in essence, ended up calling a friend of mine who was in the parachute regiment at the time and explaining that I'd been invited down, basically for an interview. And he said, "Oh, that's the SBS." And I said, "The who?" And I had literally no understanding of who they were. And in essence, I turned up, obviously having done as much due diligence as I could, but I said, "Look, I don't have an understanding of who you are, what your challenges are, what you need beyond Wikipedia. But these are the principles that I believe in. This is what I've helped others achieve through aligning with them. And hopefully, given the opportunity, I can do the same for you." And I think because I wasn't an SAS Who Dares Wins fanboy, they thought, let's give this guy a chance. And it was amazing. And it was basically a startup environment. We were creating the human performance department that was then brought out across the whole of UK Special Forces. So an amazing opportunity to work with fascinating people. And, you know, what I want to preface today's conversation about, you know, the hidden truths of extraordinary performance is that what I'm going to share with you isn't intended to take away from the extraordinary people out there achieving extraordinary things, including those that I've worked with, but it's more to view them as whole humans with the same emotions and challenges that we all experience. And my goal is to empower others to find their version of high performance, whatever that means in life. And so on that in essence was what caused me to take the jump about 2 years ago now. I was consulting and then found my business partner, Steve, and we met up for dinner, and we just couldn't stop chatting. We realized there was this amazing opportunity here to take the kind of systems, methodologies, blueprints, you know, previously reserved for the organizations that we've been a part of, that we'd felt not just help us professionally, but deeply develop on a personal level. And through technology, basically democratize this. And so Altara was born. And as I said on the intro, we're now working with lots and lots of busy professionals, execs who are wanting to not trade health for wealth or happiness, who are ultimately drowning in the noise, not knowing where to focus and how to strip it out, and also not necessarily having the systems in place to thrive in this new level of uncertainty, which requires not just a different mindset, but almost a whole way of operating. So hopefully that gives you an understanding of where I've been in regards to my own career. And pretty much everything that I've learned has either been from others or through mistakes more than anything else. So everything that I'm going to explain today and that we'll chat about will largely be because of the personal pain I felt.
I think it's the best way of learning, right? That personal pain is the way you really kind of I guess reflect, take time to think about, figure out how you do it better, or why that is. And yeah, it's really interesting. And I want to come on to these principles later on, so I'm not going to bypass those. But I guess my first question is a really kind of big question, so I'm hoping you can break this down. But you spent 10 years in those high high level environments, from rugby, Harlequin Saracens, to obviously being in New Zealand, and then into the military. What are the lessons you've learned about extraordinary peak performers in those high performance environments?
Yeah, I mean, it's such a great question, right? And I'll share definitely some of those, but it's funny because lessons appear as you go. You don't learn everything as soon as you've finished in that environment, right? I'm seeing things now that on reflection allow me to better understand things that I saw 5-10 years ago. So it's a continual process. And obviously reflection is a huge part of that. But I guess some that align with the theme about what we're speaking about today is, one, why the most successful people that we often admire struggle more than we imagine. And there's all of these myths around hyper resilience or hyper discipline, which I can speak about and explain more about from what I've seen there. There's also this myth of natural talent and all of us having a ceiling. The thing that I saw working with UK Special Forces was that nearly every rule book around what humans can do was torn up. There was one situation where in the jungle, which is one of the phases of the selection process, and you can imagine it's one of the most arduous that there is out there. It's basically what, from what I understand, people hate the most about Special Forces selection. It's not going and yomping over the hills of Brecon for 4 weeks. It's deep in the jungle with creepy crawlies in places you didn't know exist. And in essence, what they found with that was the core temperature of the guys out there actually exceeded what people should be able to survive through at times. And this was research done a long time ago. But it just shows that actually humans are unbelievably adaptable beings. And I think we often, because we do live in a level of comfort and for a long time certainty, certainly as a privileged white middle class Westerner speaking here, we've potentially lost our understanding of what actually is possible. So there's this element here of kind of this myth of talent underpins everything, and that you have a certain ceiling that you've probably reached in regards to a certain area. Another one was that actually knowledge isn't what actually creates high performance, and so we can talk about that too. And there's tons of other things out there that I've observed. By and large, and this is how I approach things now with everyone that I work with and with how we're building out Altara, is it's not necessarily the sexiest thing to say, and it doesn't necessarily sell as well, given the environments that I've been in. But actually, there are no secrets. There are purely universal principles that the best performers, teams, and organizations have understood how to align within the context of their people and their environment. And so really that's what we're doing. We're simplifying how to thrive in these environments, how to thrive within high pressure lives through universal principles, through first principles thinking. And it isn't a secret. And ultimately that's, for some, maybe a bit of a disappointment. They're hoping for this silver bullet that they hopped on this call for and will give them, everything they've ever wished. But hopefully it's more empowering than that, because it helps them to understand that achieving what you want to achieve from either a life experience or from your career or whatever is largely simple. It's just not easy. And that's a differentiation. It is simple, but it's not easy. And so what we're hopefully doing is creating some systems to allow that journey to be maybe a little bit easier, but we do only learn from what hurts us. So it's not about eradicating all of the pain. It's just about hoping that people can find their own version of high performance as a result.
Yeah, you keep going back to that, and I wrote it down. Their own version of high performance. And I think let's cover that before I go into some of those lessons and allow you to kind of maybe lead the way on that. But it's really interesting for me. That's one of my principles for people when it comes to high performance, is actually understanding what their own version of high performance is, or what their own version of success looks like.
Mm-hmm.
Can you dive into that a little bit more, in a bit more detail for you?
For what my version is, or
not for yourself, but just like, I guess, why you keep using that as a frame of reference, their own version, and what that means for the listeners, I guess.
Because a life worth living is one aligned with your values. So for you, what ultimately is meaningful should be what you're pursuing, you're driving towards. And I think putting people up on a pedestal is oftentimes more harmful than it is good, because we idolize, society culturally conditions us. I was fortunate to have a family that sent me to private school, had enough money, and I grew up around these quiet status symbols that start culturally conditioning you towards what success should look like and feel like. And a lot of my friends went off into the city and are now earning a hell of a lot of money. And that's absolutely fine, and that's great, and that gives them, a certain lifestyle that they, can afford. But I think we often build narratives around what success looks like without truly reflecting on whether that's what aligns with who we are and our values. And it's a deeply personal thing, and so that's basically why I frame it as anyone's version of high performance, because you can be a high performer in any area of life. It's ultimately about deciding what's important for you and aligning basically with that.
So then my second question, or follow-on question, is what if you can remember stands out from these extraordinary performers as kind of the key things that they saw as their visions or versions of high performance?
Yeah, well, it's a really interesting one, and this is kind of where we start talking about identity, right? How we view ourselves. But to kind of preface this, I think it's really important again to remember that the people we're talking about here, 35 to 50% of elite athletes show symptoms of anxiety, depression, burnout. PTSD rates in special forces are nearly double those in conventional lower level forces. Some studies with senior execs show that nearly 3/4 report experiencing burnout, and then more than 70% of professional musicians and actors experience mental health issues at some point. So I think what we need to first define is that they're elite performers in their area. And that ultimately what I found was pretty much everyone has an area of life where they're not. And so I think this element of identity is really important, because when we think about performance is the outcome of your habits. We know that when stress or pressure is applied, you revert to your habits, not to willpower. And we can touch on that myth of discipline and how it's unreliable, inefficient, and overrated in a bit, which will sound weird as someone that's worked with special forces. But largely, it's about understanding, one, what are the stories and narratives that I'm believing, even unconsciously, and reflecting all the way back, all of the fun stuff to childhood, to the environments you were brought up in, to the relationships that you had, to who you were around, and understanding, is that actually me, or is that a story that I'm trying to live out? And then the second part is that forms our identity. So our narratives around who we are, around our purpose, etc., forms our identity. And reflecting on that, and then that forms our values, and they form our habits, and our habits form our performance. So really, it's, for me, about understanding on a fundamental level, what are the stories that I believe? And we'll all have different stories that we believe culturally, but actually, what is it that I genuinely believe? And maybe challenging those stories Because ultimately, if we're wanting to create sustainable high performance, it needs to come from a place of basically alignment with the stories that we tell ourselves. For example, someone who wants to be a great parent, but maybe identifies as a high-flying business person, may not therefore demonstrate the behaviors and the habits that mean they're always present for their child, or vice versa. So it's really important to understand actually what are the stories that we're fueling ourselves on, and are they productive towards what we're wanting to achieve from life.
Yeah, I get that. And I also really love your example, because I'm playing in my head going, I can see that playing out to my own performance, I guess. I guess, yeah. So then where to go? You mentioned about the discipline part of the military. Love for you to elaborate on that when you were going through your story.
Yeah, I know it's a bit of a clickbaity title, but it's actually true. Like, how we achieve our potential is not down to discipline. How we achieve high performance is not down to discipline. People often view people like those that I've been fortunate to work with, like special forces operators, as hyper disciplined, but they're actually wrong. And I'll tell you why. So discipline, as we see it from a societal standpoint, is identified through certain behaviors. Behaviors like working hard, getting up early, choosing the hard thing, exercising hard, applying yourself, wanting to develop and grow, being able to confront challenges. All of these things we see in people and create that label of discipline. What we're actually seeing is identity alignment. So if you think about special forces operator, they are conditioned to view themselves as doing X and Y from day dot. Basically, when you come into the military, there is a conditioning process done that aligns you with the values of the organization. And with that, shapes your identity into, I am a special forces operator, or I am a Royal Marine. Therefore, I do 1, 2, 3. I push 99% harder than everyone else. I, always keep myself in good shape. I do blah, blah, blah. And I can tell you this, and I'm sure people wouldn't mind. I've observed some of these elite athletes and operators be the least disciplined in certain areas of life. Mm-hmm. So what we're actually talking about here is discipline being unreliable, inefficient, and overrated. And unreliable because when we're stressed, we're much likely to revert to our habits rather than rising to our level of willpower. Inefficient because the amount of energy, therefore, that's required to fight our habits and impulses to remain quote unquote disciplined can be really knackering. Mm-hmm. And then also, if we can align ourselves from an identity standpoint with that, we have to rely far less on discipline. So ironically, what we now see as hyper discipline in, let's say, special forces operators is purely actually values aligned habits that now require very little discipline to undertake. And we do have a part of our brain, for those that listen to Anti-Human out there, called the anterior mid-cingulate cortex, which has basically been shown to grow through neuroplasticity when we do uncomfortable things. So there is an element of the more uncomfortable things you do, the more you can do uncomfortable things. But the question I would ask is, what makes us want to take on hard challenges in the first place? Mm-hmm. And that's identity. That's the narratives. That's the values that are shaped by that. So ultimately, relying on discipline is not the way to achieve high performance in whatever area of life we're talking about. And ultimately, I think we need to change our relationship with relying on that or willpower in that space.
Yeah, it's really interesting. My brain keeps going to, how do we use that knowledge and awareness to empower employees?
Yeah, so I think ultimately it comes down to the self narrative and the identity and beliefs that we have around who we are. So these are being shaped every single day. They're being shaped by past experiences, by your current environment, by the people you spend time with, by what you choose to watch, listen. Ultimately, if we want to get to the root of sustainable high performance, it's about creating a different relationship with ourselves, our identity, our self-narrative. And that ultimately is around, number one, honest reflection of yourself and the stories you tell yourself. And this is something that you can do at any point. You can do it when you're coming up against anxiety or a challenge, or you can do it when you're feeling good, just as a reflective exercise, a reflection of, why do I believe that this is important? And diving into that and understanding yourself on a deeper level. Now, a lot of people will have self-limiting beliefs. We all do. They'll have narratives that don't necessarily fuel them and can often get in the way of goals or certain values that ultimately they believe they're aligned with but aren't able to enact. What I think can be a really useful tool here, obviously the environment you're in has a huge impact, but looking for ways of disproving those self-limiting beliefs.
Mm-hmm.
So even as simple as looking for 3 facts a day that disprove a belief about yourself in any area of life, and writing them down for a week. And by the end of the week, I would imagine that your relationship with that belief will have started to change.
Mm-hmm.
Rather than viewing yourself as someone maybe who can't do hard things, you could view yourself as someone who can do some hard things.
Mm-hmm.
And this builds self-efficacy. And we know that as we get little wins, we build the ability to achieve more. And so really then it just comes down to repetition. It comes down to continually going through this cycle of understanding, okay, why am I feeling this way? Or why can't I do X or Y? Looking at fundamental belief systems that are fueling that, looking for opportunities in daily life to disprove those belief systems, and then just repetition. And that over time, and obviously this isn't something that takes days or weeks, we're talking years, potentially even decades. You know, all of our behaviors are just, and our ways of thinking are purely ingrained habits.
Mm-hmm.
that are basically underpinned by years and years of belief systems.
Mm-hmm.
So this is something that's lifelong. But
Mm-hmm.
by going on that journey, by adopting that approach and that self-reinforcing loop, that's how you can look back on yourself in 5 to 10 years' time and almost not recognize the person that you were. And the thing that people often miss is, you know, we spoke about it. Often your most challenging periods in life lead to the most growth.
Mm-hmm.
But why? Well, it's because reflection.
Mm-hmm.
That's largely why, because it causes us to stop, to acknowledge how much it's hurt, and to try to understand why that's occurred. But if we can take that basically process of reflecting on a much more regular scale, that can allow you to develop at a far faster rate and not always have to rely, like I have, on mistakes and on those side of learnings, if that makes sense.
Yeah, 100%. I really like this insight. And I also like the 3 facts a day. Something I've done with my clients, exactly, because I see that also linking with confidence really well, is to recognize those areas where you don't feel confident and then understand the why behind that. And then it's the same thing. It's the disproving of that thought or that belief with a fact. And so the activity I would do is to like recognize those things and then prove it with fact why it's not true. Just take away that belief, because it is a belief normally, to why that's not true. So I really love that insight and the way you put it. Thank you. I want to go back to some of the lessons you've spoken about. But I'm going to let you lead that, because I want you to kind of lead the bits with the things that you're finding the biggest lessons you've taken away from your time in high performance environments.
Yeah. So this one around universal principles rather than tactics or secrets is probably one of the most important, I think, from my perspective, on my learnings and how I approach things now. The majority of things in life can be explained through biology, physics, evolution, whatever you want to look at it, through kind of a first principles approach. And I think something that I realized was companies that try to, or teams or people that try to copy and paste tactics ultimately don't succeed, can't create sustainable high performance. But when they lead from a place of first principles, they can. And an example of this would be if a company is experiencing in their people a lot of well-being issues.
Mm-hmm.
The first port of call is often to add a well-being program.
Mm-hmm.
But what do we know? We know these well-being programs don't actually work. And this is from what the research shows on the whole, unless there are simultaneous changes within the organization at different levels that align with these. So first principles would say, okay, let's understand why people's well-being are down. Maybe it is a well-being program. Maybe they just need some time for exercise. Maybe it's the way we're operating. Maybe it's the way our leaders are behaving. Maybe it's our belief systems around what our responsibility is to look after our people. Maybe it's their belief systems that we're not looking after them in the way they want to be. So the first port of call is kind of first principles, understanding the root cause of what it is that you're up against. And that's universal across all organizations, teams, high performers, is stripping it back to its most fundamental truths. And the next part is ultimately building out ways to either prove or falsify hypotheses that you have. So as an example, the environments that I've seen be most successful are continually looking to identify either validations or falsifications of beliefs, of the behaviors that they want to see, etc., of fundamentally them as a whole. So within that, you would say that ultimately we know as people we have needs. Maslow's hierarchy of needs is one of the most quoted, between coaches, I'm sure. And on a fundamental level, we need safety, we need shelter, we need food. But then above that, before we get to self-actualization, we need love and belonging.
Mm-hmm.
And love isn't a word that's used very often in the corporate space. Mm-hmm. But actually, what we're seeing now is people purely requesting that their companies or whoever they work for provides more in that space than what would have traditionally been provided through friendship groups, through family, through religion. And ultimately it's come as a result of people not being able to find that sense of love and belonging outside of work. We have a loneliness epidemic in London, one of the biggest cities in the world, and more than 50% of people are lonely. And you've got to ask your question here, well, if they're not getting their love and belonging in their personal life, is it the company's responsibility? And this is a philosophical question, and different companies have very different approaches to it. But yeah, understanding things from first principles is really crucial. And I think the majority of organizations reason by analogy. And so they bring in, like we say, these well-being programs or whatever, rather than looking at actually fundamentally what is it that we need to allow our people to thrive, as opposed to enforce certain behaviors or that side of things.
Yeah, that's a really nice approach, and I think it's an approach which probably fits across all three layers of a workplace, and probably in these high performance environments as well. The individual understanding what their first principle is, the team understanding what their first principle needs to be, but also leadership as well, understanding what their first principle as a leader needs to be, and how they lead, maybe even what they need to do for the team as well. Can we get into leadership? Obviously, you've worked in some amazing places and with some amazing people. What was one of the key lessons you've taken away from great leaders?
Yeah, well, I don't know if I classify myself as a great leader, but I classify myself as someone that's continually striving to be, and that has been really privileged to work with some of the best out there. And so from that, obviously, I've helped others to become better leaders. And really, it does come down to a quote that I'll often steal from Simon Sinek, which is, leaders aren't accountable for the results. They're responsible for the people that get the results. Sorry, leaders aren't responsible for the results. They're responsible for the people that get the results. And there's this difference between responsibility and accountability. And I think we often confuse the two. As leaders, we are accountable. The buck stops with us. And if the company isn't performing, unfortunately, it doesn't always go this way, but it should be the leadership that ultimately have to answer for that. But actually, to achieve the right results requires leaders to be responsible for the people, to ensure that the people that actually get the results are the ones that are feeling like they're thriving, feeling like there's meaningful work to be done, energized, they're valued, all of these different kinds of qualities. And so I think that's the biggest takeaway that I have found. And there's all these books out there, you know, like Lead Like a Parent and all these kinds of things. Leadership requires obviously sacrifice and the cost of leadership, but it's a selfless act to lead, because it requires you to subordinate your own preferences for both for the team, basically, for the people and for the outcome. So I think that's what it all comes down to. Leadership is people. You know, you've got leadership strategies and all these systems and tactics out there to become a better leader. But if you don't fundamentally care about your people and want to create the conditions for them to thrive, then ultimately all the tactics in the world are, largely useless. Yeah.
I've got a random question aligned to that, because you said on your journey here you've made a lot of mistakes, and you are people focused. I think probably even before you started, you were people focused, because I think that is part of your identity, from what I'm gathering. What was the biggest mistake you made in leadership, and the lesson you learned from that?
Yeah, there's a few. So I think the one that rocked me the most was when I was offered the head role, basically head of the department over in New Zealand. You know, it was a year and a bit after being an intern, so a huge step up. And I was 24, and I was extremely insecure, as the majority of young people are at that age. And so ultimately, I think I lost sight of what had allowed me to get there, which was, in a funny way, serving others. When I was in a lower role, I saw my job as ensuring I could support those that were out there performing, or the head coach, or the my boss. When I took over his job, I thought that my responsibility was to have the answers. And I think also because of insecurity, which leads to ego, that's all ego is, I then didn't behave in the way that I should have, from a selflessness standpoint. And I avoided looking silly. I avoided being vulnerable. I was very close-minded in regards to how I thought we should prepare the athletes physically. And I remember one day at training, and this is probably the moment I'm least proud of in my professional career, but myself and the head coach were having an argument at the side of the pitch, not like raised voice or anything, but a genuine argument. And it was in front of all the other players. And actually, it was that moment when we stepped away from that actually we both stepped back, reflected, and then came together and said, we can't do this. That's not right. That's not how I want to lead. That's not how I want to role model leadership. And it basically took me on this kind of reflective journey of, okay, well, why have I shifted away from focusing on the people to focusing on the results? And as a result, the people became obviously still important, but not primary focus. And I think it was largely insecurities, not believing and understanding probably in the process as much, trying to force the outcome rather than realizing that Henry isn't going to have, the biggest input in any way, shape or form on what the outcome looks like. It's the team. So yeah, that was really, really hard. Because it wasn't great. My relationship wasn't great with the head coach, but we found basically alignment through it, and both realized we'd come at it with closed-minded approach. He was a new coach as well that had come in, and so probably had these same insecurities. So it was just a matter of two people who hadn't yet learned that what got them there was actually what to focus on. So yeah, that's I'd say my biggest learning was just never ever losing sight of what my responsibility is as a leader. And there's a great quote, actually, I don't know if anyone's watched it, but the series Yellowstone, there's a great quote in it where they said, the trick is to never believe that you've earned it. And I think that's a great lesson. And it doesn't mean to always, have raging imposter syndrome, but it does mean that ultimately getting that role isn't what that role is about. It's about what it affords you to create for others. And there's this great phrase in Maori culture called whakapapa, which basically refers to this Maori ideology, is probably the wrong word, but belief around how each of us are custodians of the land, of jobs, of our lineage, and we're all connected to those that came before us and those that will come after. Whilst the light is shining on you, it's your responsibility to leave it in the best shape that you can for the next person. And I think, industries like farming understand this. A lot of farmers understand this. They have this kind of nurturing quality. Well, I think that's a beautiful way to view leadership, in that ultimately the title, the money, the respect, the status, it's not for you, it's for your role. And ultimately, that can be taken in an instant. But what will allow you to develop as a leader is by focusing on how you can support your people the most. And that's just my interpretation, but that is something I really do believe in. Yeah,
I love that. And there's a lot of emotional intelligence at that age to recognize that.
Yeah, I think I'm lucky that I have, say lucky. My mum is a counsellor and I'm married to a clinical psychologist. So I've got to like people and psychology. Although, to be fair, at the end of the day, I think my wife's quite happy switching off and not chatting about any of it, knackered. But yeah, I've definitely inherited that, I think, from my mum. Both my parents are very emotionally intelligent, and not to say that I'm amazingly emotionally intelligent, but I think I have inherited a curiosity in people, in why we are the way we are, why we think, what we do what we do, and that's just grown and grown. And it's taken me into all areas of life, from meditation to studying kind of ancient spiritual practices and understanding that, through to high performance environments that I've been in. I think this all comes down to a curiosity in people, and in the human experience. So I think EQ just naturally comes from reflecting on both your own experiences, feelings, emotions, but also others and what you observe.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And the word reflect or reflect in, I think that at 24 years old, I probably didn't do that until I was about 29 is when I began to reflect on those things. So it really hit a note with me. I was like, oh, actually, yeah, I can a lot of respect at 24, 25, being able to step back and have that like very clever and mature conversation with a head coach and to understand that, yeah, this is what's happened. Maybe it's a little bit of things coming into play. I think it's quite impressive.
Well, I appreciate that. I could sit here and say thank you, but I think it was more sink or swim. I realized that actually, if I was going to keep my role and achieve what I wanted us to achieve, I needed to change. Like, I didn't have an option. Couldn't continue the way I was, and I think although when you go through these periods in life, they feel terrible, they're some of the best because they force you to reflect, on maybe a deeper level than you would traditionally. And so that was really what kickstarted this journey that I've been on around reflecting on myself and around me and ultimately, all the stuff we've spoken about, like identity and our belief systems and aligned values and the life experience that we want. I do genuinely think that challenging experiences force us to reflect, and that's where the beauty is in them.
Yeah, I love it. I could finish up now, but I have one more dying question I really want to know. You mentioned about getting the role in the army, and it was down and he kind of went in there and said, "These are my principles." Are they the same? Is that the principles you're talking about? Is that the first principle, or is it actually you have some principles that you believe in, which got you that role?
Yeah, I think there are kind of a set of fundamental principles that I believe in. Ultimately, it depends on really the application of them, which are most pertinent. But yeah, some of those are, and they're all common sense. That's the thing. But in regards to giving you some now, we've spoken about them, but first principles rather than reasoning by analogy, ensuring that you're meeting people's fundamental human needs, and they're across all different areas, and I break it down into 5. So it's purpose, people, problem, process, and proof. And there's principles across each of those. People. Are people aligned in their sweet spot where the point at which their strengths, interests, and values intersect? That's really important for them to feel energized in their role. For problem, do we fundamentally understand the root cause of this, or are we jumping to solutions? There's the classic reframing process that a lot of people skip. Are we actually approaching the right problems, or are we looking at this the wrong way? Process, ultimately, how are we organizing ourselves and working as one entity, because that's what companies are, it's collective intelligence. And then you've got proof. Do we understand what success looks like for all stakeholders, and are we actually measuring that? Are we communicating that? And that's different for everyone. And then purpose is really, do you feel a sense of a connection and meaning to both the organization, the team, the mission, and to your values? And like, these aren't terribly secret or complex things, but they have been universal across all of the high-performing organizations I've been really privileged to either work in or to spend time with or to discuss with. And And so, yeah, really, I guess the overarching principle is that there are universal principles rather than secrets, if that makes sense.
100%. I love that. Yeah. Henry, thank you so much.
No, it's a pleasure. No, it's been brilliant to chat, and I'm sure we could have gone all day. There's tons of other stuff that would be great to dive into, but really appreciate your time and always love having these conversations, and hopefully it's valuable for the listeners.
Yeah, it definitely is. I've taken a lot away, reaffirmed a few things, made me question a few things. So yeah. And I work in this space. So if I'm working in this space, hopefully other people who maybe don't work in this space, they've taken lots of lessons away. So yeah, I really appreciate it. Stay where you are quickly. I'll stop recording. But everybody else, thank you. Hope you've enjoyed the episode, and keep an eye out for the next one. Take care.
Cheers, guys.